Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Vandenberg Space Force Base, preparing to round out what has been a very busy launch week for SpaceX. I'm Will Robinson Smith. I'll be providing our commentary for the duration of this coverage for spaceflight now. We're broadcasting from our news bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center this afternoon. Our editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast. And after a very long and busy launch day, our photographers Adam Bernstein and Michael Kane are getting some well-earned rest since this is a West Coast-based launch. Of course, they have some great photography from the past couple of missions here on Florida's Space Coast, both the Space Force's USSF 124 mission and early this morning, the launch of a moon-bound robotic lander for Intuitive Machines. You can catch both of those on their profiles on X, as well as on our social media on Twitter and Threads. Now, T-minus 32 minutes, 8 seconds and counting away from the launch of SpaceX's next mission. A big milestone for them as this is their 300th Falcon 9 launch to date, if all goes well, with the Starlink 7-14 mission, the 9th dedicated Starlink launch in 2024. As you can see on our slate here, SpaceX is targeting a T0 liftoff time of 1:34 p.m. Pacific, 4:34 p.m. Eastern, and 21:34 UTC. Normally, we would talk about the range of times within the window that they have available to them, but we have heard that they have started propellant load on the vehicle, which means that SpaceX is committing to that launch attempt at those pre-listed times. If you'd like to help support our coverage of the space program, there's a quick and easy way to do that and help more folks find this live coverage this afternoon just by hitting the like button. It'll let the YouTube algorithm do its thing and bring this to more folks as we continue to step through the count. Naturally, we can't do these broadcasts without our wonderful channel members. Taking a peek at the live chat here, I see we have a number of them joining us for one more bout of launch coverage this afternoon. See Rita Loy, Tammy Singh, Stephen Fraser, Oscar the Rosalina fan, and Callistia Lee, amongst some others popping in. Mark Casada, good to see you all this afternoon. Channel membership, of course, comes with a number of perks, including access to 4K views of all of our Cape-based launches, discounts at our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com, and access to the member-only videos here on the YouTube channel. If you haven't already, also consider subscribing to us here on the channel and click the bell icon when you do so and turn on all notifications for YouTube. That way you'll get notified when any of our videos go live or we begin these live streams and you won't miss any of the launch action. Last but not least, you can also use the YouTube Super Chat feature if you'd like to ask a comment or ask a question or have a comment about this or other missions coming up on the horizon. Last little bit of housekeeping before we turn back to the main attraction today. We do have our live news roundup show, news from the press site, that's coming up tomorrow afternoon. Actually, just about 24 hours from now, coming up at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time right here on the channel. You'll have our guest announcement coming up, so be sure to check in with our social media on Threads and X, formerly known as Twitter, for that. Now, T-minus 29 minutes and counting. At this point, the prop load process has started, so let's go ahead and pivot to that. Let you know the fueling milestones that we are tracking coming up here. For those familiar with Falcon 9 launches or just been with us for the last about a day and a half or so, you're now very familiar with this rhythm and dance. But for those who would like a refresh, or maybe haven't been with us for a recent Falcon 9 launch, here's how things begin. Starts at T minus 38 minutes when the launch director makes the call on the go for propellant load, which was given the go ahead about 10 minutes ago. Propellant load started with a combination of both RP1 or rocket grade kerosene being loaded onto the first and second stages of the Falcon 9 rocket. At the same time, liquid oxygen was also pumped aboard the first stage. At T minus 30 minutes, cryogenic helium is loaded onto the pressure tanks on board the first stage. Same with the second stage coming up T minus 26 minutes. They'll be our next fueling milestone. At T minus 23 minutes, the loading of second stage kerosene wraps up. It's followed by T minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds when the strong back chill down process begins. Before that, though, there's the so-called big vent from the strong back. Good indication that fueling is moving along on time as those feed lines are chilled. That sets up liquid oxygen loading on the second stage, the last big piece of fueling to begin, T minus 16 minutes. That's followed at T minus 7 minutes when the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines gets underway. It involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and the turbo pumps. Helps to protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes out, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T minus 4.5 minutes, the strong back retract sequence begins, and just a little before that point, we should start getting video feeds from SpaceX, and of course, we will pipe that into you as soon as that becomes available. Strong back retract begins with the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings opening up. And here in Vandenberg, the transporter erector reclines about 13 degrees away from the Falcon 9, stays in that position until liftoff. T minus 3 minutes, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is completely topped off. Then at T minus 2 minutes, the second stage liquid oxygen load completes. At that point, the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, the control of the ground sequencer, for the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director gives their go for liftoff at 45 seconds out. The engine ignition command is issued at T minus 3 seconds. And if all 9 engines ignite and are healthy, the flight computer will give the command for the hold down clamps to release the vehicle at T0. Again, that's coming up at 1:34 p.m. Pacific, 4:34 p.m. Eastern, 21:34 UTC. As we are getting our live coverage going this afternoon, want to thank a few folks for their support. Stephen Fraser joining us as our newest channel member, just as we were getting the live stream started. Welcome aboard, Stephen. Glad to have you with us. And our thanks to Marcus Gallegos for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that, Marcus. Thanks for spreading the generosity. And to our newest channel members, welcome aboard. Hope you enjoy channel membership. And be sure to thank Marcus if you haven't already in the live chat. For all of our friends in the Southern California area, hopefully the cloud cover, whatever may be lingering around, is not too obscuring, and you'll actually be able to see the launch go off in just a little over 24 minutes. For those wanting a refresh of where this rocket is going, let's go ahead and shift to talk about the trajectory. Of course, the Falcon 9 rocket is going to be lifting off from SpaceX's West Coast pad in Vandenberg Space Force Base. This is Space Launch Complex 4 East, or Slick 4E. The vehicle will fly in a southeasterly trajectory once it leaves the pad, heading along the coast of California and Mexico's west coast. The orange line is the path of the first stage booster, which will be landing on the drone ship out in the Pacific. And that is, of course, I still love you. That drone ship landing coming, just about 8.5 minutes after liftoff. The payload fairings will also be recovered as they splash down in the Pacific Ocean. Well, they'll be scooped up by one of the recovery vessels, brought back into port, refurbished, and turned around for future flights. SpaceX is, of course, reusing their fairings as often as possible for the missions for which it makes the most sense. Both NASA and U.S. Space Force's Space Systems Command, which contract missions through SpaceX, currently are not reflying payload fairings yet, but are both independently going through the process of evaluating when it will start to make sense to do so. Around the time we were covering NASA's mission, PACE, which is Plankton Aerosol Cloud Ocean Ecosystem, that acronym for the spacecraft, now flying in a sun synchronous polar orbit. We were told that it will be about a year and a half to 2 years, more than likely, before NASA's Launch Services Program, or LSP, based here at Kennedy Space Center, before they are ready to start entertaining the use of flight-proven payload fairings. It's about that same time scale for Space System Command as well. Of course, it'll be a big benefit for SpaceX once those payload fairings are able to start being reflown, as it saves them about $6 million every time they are able to do that. We're now T minus 20 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. Coming up on the so-called big vent here from the strong back. Just getting ready to thermally condition the feed lines ahead of liquid oxygen load, which will start at T minus 16 minutes, coming up here shortly. T minus 19 minutes, 35 seconds and counting. That big vent will be underway now. About 3 or so minutes from that wrapping up. And the start of LOX load on the second stage. We're now T-minus 17 minutes, 36 seconds and counting. About a minute away from the big vent wrapping up and second stage LOX load beginning. Taking a quick peek back at the live chat, want to thank Marcus Gallegos for gifting another Spaceflight Now membership. Really appreciate that. And to Titus Kitchen, thanks for being a member for 3 months. The simple message here saying, go SpaceX. Turning to the payloads on board this particular mission, of course, this is Starlink launch numbers, or Starlink Group 7-14. Another batch of 22 Starlink V2 mini satellites on board. Each of them clocks in at about 1,760 pounds or 800 kilograms. Once on orbit, their solar panels will unfurl to have a wingspan of 100 feet or 30 meters. They use argon hull thrusters for in-orbit maneuvers, replacing the previously used krypton thrusters. They were built in Redmond, Washington, not too far from Seattle. They'll be deployed at about 180 miles above the Earth's surface, or 290 kilograms in altitude, at a 53-degree inclination. As mentioned, this will be the 9th dedicated Starlink launch this calendar year. To date, there have been 5,850 Starlinks launched, including 6 of those direct-to-cell satellites that launched a few missions ago. According to expert and tracker of all things on orbit, Jonathan McDowell, there are currently 5,438 Starlinks remaining on orbit. 22 more will be added today. While we don't have a rendering from SpaceX of what the Starlink V2 minis look like when they're on orbit configuration, we do have this image snapped last year from a satellite from HEO Robotics, capturing what a Starlink V2 mini looks like with those solar panels extended from the main body there. We're now T-minus 14 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. Certainly appreciate the more than 1,500 of you that are joining us for an afternoon Starlink launch. If you haven't already, certainly appreciate it if you hit the like button, allow more folks to find this coverage as we come into the final 14 minutes of the count here. We're now at T minus 11 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. Let's go ahead and take a look at the launch timeline once the vehicle leaves the pad. And this is what we'll be expecting for the flight of the Starlink 7-14 mission. Of course, starts with that liftoff at 1:34 p.m. Pacific, 4:34 p.m. Eastern. It'll be followed at T plus 1 minute, 12 seconds when the Falcon 9 passes through max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. It's followed by a few different events in rapid succession. First is main engine cutoff, first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, T plus 2 minutes and 31 seconds, followed a few seconds later by stage separation, and then the Merlin vacuum engine will ignite for second stage engine ignition, or SES1. Then the payload fairings will jettison a little after 3 minutes into flight. It's followed up by the first stage entry burn as the Falcon 9 first stage begins to slam on the brakes, making its way down toward the drone ship. Of course, I still love you. That burn starting at T plus 6 minutes and 10 seconds, lasting a total of 21 seconds, as you see here. And the first stage landing burn begins at T plus 8 minutes and 2 seconds, and it should touch down on the drone ship at T plus 8 minutes and 25 seconds. It's followed by second stage engine cutoff, T plus 8 minutes and 44 seconds, SECO 1. Falcon 9 second stage will go into a parking orbit, setting up the second burn at T plus 53 minutes and 37 seconds for just a quick 1 second burn of that Merlin vacuum engine, preparing Starlink satellites to deploy at T plus 1 hour, 2 minutes, and 31 seconds. The drone ship, of course, is still left. You, of course, getting quite a workout. It is preparing to receive its 83rd booster landing to date. When you combine all of them, this will be the 212th Falcon 9 booster landing on a drone ship. SpaceX's fleet continues to be hard workers out there, although we've seen quite a number of RTLS, or return to landing site operations, here on Florida's Space Coast. 2 boosters from 2 separate missions currently occupying both of the landing zones over at the Cape. We're now T minus 8 minutes, 29 seconds and counting. We are about a minute and a half away from the engine chill. We're now T minus 7 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. Just a little bit away from the start of the thermal conditioning of the 9 Merlin 1D engines at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket. Want to thank Jim Edgar for a very generous $50 super chat. Really appreciate that, Jim, and good to see you again this afternoon. Jim says, Jim Edgar and Lisa Bean watching from Seattle with the cats, Rex, Kip, and Millie. Go Falcon 9, go Starlink. Oh, that's actually very sweet, and actually a bit of a coincidence there. My mother also has a cat named Millie, Slightly different spelling, though, with a IE as opposed to a Y. Grew up in a family of theater folks or thespians, and my mom's cat Millie takes its name from the show Thoroughly Modern Millie, for those who have seen that or heard the cast album. Quite an enjoyable show. T minus 6 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. Before we start getting video from SpaceX, for those who may have just joined, I see we have now a little over 2,500 folks watching us live. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the like button, bring some more people into this live coverage as we get ready to round out the final minutes of the count. And for those who may have joined us since we hit it before, let's go back and revisit the trajectory, especially since we may have some folks in Southern California who would like to know if they'll be able to see Falcon 9 once it starts flying. The vehicle set to lift off from Space Launch Complex 4 East, Slick 4E, at Vandenberg Space Force Base. It'll fly in a southeasterly trajectory along the coasts of Southern California and the western coast of Mexico. The path of the orange line here on the map is the path of the SpaceX first stage booster, which will be landing on the drone ship. Of course, I Still Love You, stationed out in the Pacific Ocean. And normally we would go through the long booster history of some of these boosters, but this one actually is just flying for a second
Tanks
time,
depressing for strong back
having
retract.
previously flown on the Starlink 7-9 mission back on January 3rd. We're now T minus 4 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. See mostly sunny skies there over Vandenberg as we're now getting video from SpaceX as they're preparing for the strong back retract to begin. We're now T minus 3 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. Just a little over 30 seconds away from the completion of first stage liquid oxygen loading. It looks like some fairly thin clouds there in the area of Southern California around Vandenberg. So hopefully for all of our friends that are in that part of the state, you'll actually be able to see this launch go off in just a few minutes.
Stage 1, LOX load complete.
And you heard that call up for stage 1 LOX load wrapping up. Final step in the fueling process coming up in now just less than a minute when they will complete stage 2 LOX load. At that point, the vehicle will be fully fueled with 1 million pounds of propellant.
Stage 2 LOX load complete.
And with that call out, the Falcon 9 is now fully fueled. Looks to be a pretty spectacular day weather-wise there at Vandenberg, which you might call a Chamber of Commerce day. That venting you see there are the ground gas closeouts as they clear the feed lines and prepare to launch this vehicle coming up in just over 1 minute.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Coming up on the launch director giving their go-ahead to send the 300th Falcon 9 rocket to date on its way. Just about 45 seconds.
LD is go for launch.
And there we've got the call out. This Falcon is ready to fly. 22 Starlink satellites on board.
T-minus 30 seconds.
And as we pass the final 30 seconds, let's go ahead and listen into SpaceX for that terminal count. Get ready to see booster 1082 fly for just the second time.
T-minus 15 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. And liftoff with Falcon 9. Go Starlink. Go SpaceX.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
M1D chamber pressures are nominal.
And we have a good
Power
liftoff of the
telemetry
Falcon
nominal.
9 rocket. Soaring high above the Golden State. Now coming up on a minute into flight.
Falcon 9 is supersonic.
That call up, meaning the vehicle is now traveling faster than the speed of sound.
Max Q.
Falcon 9 now passing the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Coming up on those key events in rapid succession. Main engine cutoff coming up just over a minute from now. It'll be followed by stage separation, second stage engine start, SES-1, and then fairing deployment rounding out those events, finishing up at T plus 3 minutes and 9 seconds. Some gorgeous views of California as the Falcon 9 continues to climb, coming up on 2 minutes into flight. As we start to see the curvature of the Earth off to the left-hand side of the screen, appears to be a nominal burn on those 9 Merlin engines. About 20 seconds away from main engine cutoff.
MECO.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC startup.
All good callouts, all great views here from the onboard cameras. Fairing deployment is next.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And you see those Starlink satellites now exposed to the vacuum of space for the first time. On the left-hand side of your screen, the titanium winglets on the Falcon 9 first stage have also deployed those hypersonic grid fins. They help provide stability and steering as the first stage booster, tail number 1082, makes its way down toward the drone ship. Of course, I still love you. Falcon 9 first stage has reached its apogee as you see the altitude now beginning to drop slightly after hitting a peak of 115 kilometers. Coming up on the start of the entry burn in just a little over a minute. That starts at T plus 6 minutes and 10 seconds, wrapping up at about T plus 6 minutes
Nominal
and 31
trajectory.
seconds. Those bursts that you're seeing there are the cold gas thrusters helping to adjust the attitude of the vehicle. Coming up on the start of that first stage entry burn in just a few seconds.
Stage 1 entry burn startup. Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
With the end of that entry burn, you can see the first stage telemetry, its speedometer dropping rapidly as the booster continues to make its way down toward the drone ship. Of course, I still love you.
Stage 1
So-
FTS has saved.
Second stage Merlin vacuum engine
Nominal
continues
trajectory.
a nominal burn, as you just heard.
Stage 2 FTS is saved.
Stage 1 transonic.
With the call out that stage 1 is transonic, that just means it's traveling now below the speed of sound.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Second stage
See, the
interval
landing
guidance.
burn has begun. The drone ship now coming into sight.
Landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And there we have it. The first stage booster, tail number 1082, now up and back on its second flight.
Deco 1.
And the Merlin vacuum engine has cut off, now entering into a parking orbit. And with the Starlink satellite deployment coming up at T plus 1 hour, 2 minutes, and 31 seconds, so far, this 300th flight of a Falcon 9 rocket is going pretty darn successfully. And with that, we're going to go ahead and start to wrap up our live coverage. Really appreciate everyone spending part of their Thursday with us. Going to close out, as we always do, by looking at where the mission stats now currently stand with a successful launch and first stage booster landing. So here we go. This was the second flight, as mentioned, of Falcon 9 booster 1082. Big milestone for SpaceX, the 300th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 15th Falcon 9 launch of 2024. This was also SpaceX's 15th orbital launch of the year. This was SpaceX's 101st orbital launch in the last 365 days. Actually, the first time they've hit 101 in 365. This was the 66th orbital launch from Slick 4 East. The 134th overall orbital launch from this pad as well. And the 6th orbital launch from Vandenberg in 2024. Moving along to some recovery stats. This was the 83rd landing on the drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You. The 212th SpaceX drone ship landing to date. And overall, the 274th Falcon booster landing. Finally, rounding it out with a global overlook. This was the 6th orbital launch from California, the 16th orbital launch from U.S. soil, the 17th orbital launch from a U.S. rocket company. Of course, it got to include Rocket Lab down in New Zealand. And this was the 31st orbital launch from around the globe. Here's a breakdown by nation of all these launches. The United States continues to lead with about 55% of the pie so far. China, with 8 launches, has about a little over a quarter of the launch total. Iran and Russia both have 2 launches each on the year. And India and Japan each have 1 launch apiece. Looking forward to a launch from Japan actually coming up pretty soon. The launch of their H3 rocket on its second test flight coming up on the 16th/17th. It'll be the 16th from an East Coast perspective, but the 17th locally in Japan. I know India is rapidly making its way towards its next launch as well, so these launch stats will continue to change. Be sure to keep up to date with us as we continue to track all of these orbital launches for you from mission to mission. And also, be sure to be with us tomorrow. Love to see you back here on Friday at 4 o'clock, less than 24 hours now, as we have our live News from the Press Site show, a roundup of all the big space news items of the week. Those include, of course, obviously some of the big marquee launches that we've had in the past several days, some of the big updates to submissions like Varda being able to bring back its capsule that has been on orbit since last year, coming back for a re-entry next week on the 21st. So we'll be sure to cover that. And also Intuitive Machines Nova C lander, which launched early this morning, getting ready to land on the moon's south pole, about 10 degrees north of the proper south pole. That's coming up on February 22nd. So as busy as this week has been, next week going to be just about as busy with some marquee landings as well, both here on Earth as well as on the moon. So if you're not already subscribed to the channel, now is a great time to do so. Be sure to hit the bell icon to turn on notifications, and also make sure you have all notifications turned on YouTube so you don't miss any of our videos or live streams. And be sure to check our social media for the guest announcements for tomorrow's live News from the Press Site show. Again, starting at 4 p.m. Eastern. Hope to have some of you with us for that. Look forward to answering some of your questions. So be sure to start thinking of those now. Want to thank our editor for Spaceflight Now, Stephen Young, for running the technical aspects of the broadcast today. And most importantly, want to thank all of you for spending part of your afternoon with us. Really appreciate that. Look forward to seeing you again. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Be good to yourself, be good to others, and we will see you next time. Have a great one.